Okay, the reading science. As Louisa Moats said, Dr. Louisa Moats, who's one of our famous people in reading, she said, teaching reading is rocket science. And I always use that phrase because teachers often think, well, how hard, difficult is this? Or their administrator has said, how hard can this be? Or you receive no training in it, so how hard could it be? But really, it is difficult, and we're not given the skills and the tools that we need to do the job that we're asked to do. So today we're going to talk a little bit about that science that goes into giving you the tools that you need to do that job well. And we know in this country that we have an issue with teaching reading. And so how are we going to turn that around? It's going to start with the science. We're going to talk about how to get that into the classrooms where the teachers are, where the work is happening. But first, I want to introduce myself a little bit and get some background. My background is in teaching, but I came to the world of teaching only after I had my first career, which was as a reporter for the Salt Lake Tribune, which is a local paper where I live. And I worked for the paper, loved reading, loved writing, met a guy, fell in love, we got married. We were on our honeymoon, and we skied at the base of the Tetons. If anybody knows what those are, beautiful mountains. We did some skiing, very adventurous, it was wonderful. And that evening, we were going to sleep out in a tent at the base of the Tetons, awesome. And I, earlier in the day, had purchased a book. We'd gone shopping, and I picked up a book, because I like to do that when I'm camping, pull a book. And my husband said nothing, was into it with me. We picked a book, it was great. We get into the tent that night, I pull out the book, I start reading, really into it. I pass it over to him to take over reading duties. And he struggles and can barely read it. And I didn't even know that was possible, seeing as he was in college and on the dean's list in college. How do you do that? I had never heard anyone struggle like that. That was my introduction to what would be dyslexia, but I didn't even know what to call it, neither did he. And in fact, as he got a little more comfortable to tell me what was happening, he said, well, I read better than most of the people in my household. So he had a household full of people who had dyslexia, none of them knew it. So this is often what you'll find is that people have never known, have made it all the way through school. And as my husband would later reveal, he had very uncomfortable experiences in school and pretty much knew his educational career was over by first grade. And he said, I never again had confidence that I would ever be able to succeed. And he wasn't successful in school. So we'll get to that too. The science would have helped him so much, helped both of us, because as we would later find out, it's heritable. So funny that his family, he said he came from a household full of people struggling to read, we would go on to have 2 children out of our 4 who would struggle to read as well, because dyslexia has a heritable component, and about 50% of the time you have a 50-50 chance of having children with dyslexia if there's dyslexia in the family. So we're going to look at these NAEP results. If you haven't seen them, that's that National Assessment of Educational Progress, but here they are once again to look at. We have grade 4 and grade 8 data. We have taken national here, but you can look up your state as well. Pretty much it reflects the same story, that we haven't seen a great deal of growth. That's one thing over the years, and no matter how much money we throw at it. And the other thing that we see is that we have a larger percentage of our students who aren't reading at proficient or above. And that's the story today. So we have more students who aren't reading at a level to get them to college and through college and into a job that they would like that requires reading. And again, we can see the stagnant data here as it progresses over time, a good 30 plus years. And my state is not the only state that spends a fortune on reading and we don't get any results. Human reading ability is distributed on a continuum like height and weight, and roughly 60% of children are wired from birth for reading. We know that spoken language is natural. All of us are wired for that. We're going to take to it like a duck to water, unless I have a hearing issue. And then I might have a struggle with that, but I know what that is. But otherwise, this spoken language, we're wired for it. It comes to us naturally. I put you down in a different place of the world, you're going to learn to speak that language. But reading is not the same. It is a man-made code. But we treat it like it's very, very natural. It is very unnatural. There's a percentage of the population that's wired for it, as we say. They'll take to it. Even with pretty mediocre instruction, they'll take to it. But there's another percentage of the population that will need really good instruction in order to ever get a handle on the code. Dyslexia, and my husband is a part of that percentage. It also is on a continuum. Can you have someone who has mild dyslexia versus a more profound case? Yes, and in my own household, I have a wide spectrum of people with dyslexia in my household. It manifests differently. Some need more intervention than others. And then also, regardless of who teaches them, some of those kids, what instructional methods are employed or how well those methods are presented, those students are likely to learn to read at least at a modest level. This is the piece I want you to be aware of too. We might skip over it. That with better instruction, could those students who, they're going to be okay readers, be even better readers? Data tells us yes. Yes, they can. And we'll talk about a little bit about comprehension, how that affects comprehension for a larger majority of kids who could have been better readers. But the other 2/5 of children, those that we were talking about who are in the bottom 2 quintiles on screening and predictive measures, are at risk of reading failure. And among poor and minority populations, only about 16% are proficient reading by 4th grade, compared to 42% in the general population. So outrageous statistics. Again, how do we need this? Underlined here for us, and this is Louisa Moats that we talked about a little earlier, how these students ultimately fare as readers is profoundly affected by the reading programs they are subjected to. And I want to pay attention to subjected to. They have no choice. So my cute son, who had a very good case of dyslexia, had already had 4 different reading intervention programs by the time he was in 2nd grade, and he was still on a kindergarten level. How does that feel to that student? So here we're looking at the 4th grade slump, what we call a slump. But really, it's a consistent pattern, and this is some research that is very steady from Harvard University. Of course, it tells the same story that a lot of them do. This research is included in a lot of different things that you'll read in books. But what it is we can see an increase in the ability of kids to hang on K through 3. Even if the instruction isn't great, they might have good little memories. Maybe they're exposed to just a very small amount of literature, but they look like readers. They can look like readers to us. And then they get up to 4th grade and they flatline. And also, we change in 4th grade, as everybody knows, from learning to read to learning about everything by reading. And that's how that can look quite different. And the vocabulary demand, a lot of things will come into play. So approximately how many children are affected by dyslexia, that one that we're talking about where you do have a case that's a neurobiological difference? About 1 in 5 children have characteristics of dyslexia. And that tells you how many students, this illustration here. But we can also have students, and I've seen this before, who look like they have dyslexia because of the instruction. And so we'll talk a little bit about that too as we move on. And the majority of those with dyslexia have average or above average intelligence. There is no correlation between dyslexia and IQ. At some point, a very low IQ, of course, will affect comprehension and other factors. But I have seen in schools where a student has a low IQ. I taught a young man at a 60 IQ, and they had pretty much neglected him, thinking, he can't read, he's got a 60 IQ. He was a great little reader. Great structured literacy intervention. He was a terrific little reader. He didn't have a language-based learning disability. That's the difference. His mother was so grateful. His comprehension at some point is going to need some help because of the low IQ. But could he be a good little decoder? Absolutely. Where on the flip side, I've had kids with very high IQs who struggle to decode, and that is because IQ is not hooked to that decoding ability. So here we have some of the brain research. This is that Yale study of fMRI scans, and this is Shaywitz, Dr. Shaywitz from her Overcoming Dyslexia book, one of the seminal books that came out, got a lot of dialogue started. She runs the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity. This is funded by Steven Spielberg, who has dyslexia. Kind of interesting. So here we have, it's showing us the brain difference, parts of the brain that light up or are necessary and talking to each other when we're reading. Now, this has become more complicated as we've gotten better research in science. In the beginning, this is kind of a simple view of what the brain looks like. But as we're finding and doing more fMRI studies, we find that even dyslexia brains can look different inside of the field of dyslexia. So is there one brain that I could throw up here and show you amongst other brains that says this is the dyslexia brain? No, and actually I've seen that done by some neuropsychologists. It's very fascinating to look at when they'll show you a brain that's dyslexia and ADHD, or just ADHD and dyslexia. And she said, can you pick out the kid who just has dyslexia? Well, I can't, and I'm a neuropsychologist. So this is going to be very interesting moving forward. That's what complicates our interventions. We know some really good things that we can do for kids. That's why we stick to them, that structured literacy. It's why it's so important, is because there isn't just one kind of brain. We have a few things going on. So primary characteristics of dyslexia, let's look at them. These are solid. These are the solid 3. And then we can go deeper if we need to, but these are awesome to get us started. That number 1, family history of reading learning difficulties. Boy, for my husband, right here, this would have been a giant red flag. And this one too, think about it. When you take your child to a pediatrician, the pediatrician doesn't even touch your child until the pediatrician takes a history and asks you about the birth of your child, different things about your child, before they even lay a hand on helping your child. But we'll take kids every day and want to help them and intervene, but we haven't asked anything about their history. It's every bit as important in what we do. Number 2, difficulty with phonemic awareness, identifying or producing accurate consonant and vowel sounds. There's a lot of research and talk about phonemic awareness, and a lot of educators are So how is that different from phonics? What does that look like? For phonemic awareness, and just to do the quick overview, if you're in a dark room, you can't see anything, and I give you sounds and ask you to manipulate them, that's phonemic awareness. I haven't introduced the letters yet. Phonics is where I introduce the letters, and those both are together. That phonemic awareness piece. So do I need to have a child who's capable of reading to assess their phonemic awareness? I don't. They just have to be capable of producing the sounds. So I have a 3-year-old that I've been asked to look at who's already struggling with speech sounds and getting them in the right order. My darling son, who had that higher case of dyslexia, he would, for meow, he would say ow me, ow me, ow me every time. And I would say, oh, it's meow, and he could finally do it, but he would get it wrong. That's a tip-off. And if I see that in more than one place, that's a tip-off. With family history, absolutely. I'm going to be looking at that kid. He was doing that at 4 years old. So I can see that very early. Also directionality. Remember, in dyslexia, there can be a directionality issue, left, right, up, down, push, pull. So a kid in kindergarten that keeps consistently can't get push and pull, can't even jump up and down. You'll see even in being able, let's jump up, and they're going down, and then we'll go up and they go down. So you'll be able to see directionality issues. With my son, he had it all, classic. Shoes were never on the right feet. So that's another thing. It's uncomfortable to wear your shoes on the wrong feet all the time. He had them on the wrong feet all the time. His shirts were always wrong side, backwards. You got a 50-50 shot. Every morning they were on backwards. I'm like, we couldn't get it right one morning. I even saw a young man with dyslexia so bad, his pants were on backwards with the zipper on the back. And he was in 4th grade displaying signs with family, and no one ever picked it up. We can pick these things up, and struggling hardcore with the language. So these are signs. They're telling us things. The other thing is difficulty with rapid automatic naming, recall of known letters and sounds. This RAN piece is a piece everybody's going after now too, to kind of figure out, how does RAN affect reading? Well, we know what it does with reading, but how do you improve it? We know that if we just drill RAN outside of a program, it doesn't really generalize into helping with reading. We know that, so we don't do that. We don't recommend that. But does RAN improve if a student has a good structured literacy program? Yeah, it does, which is interesting, and nobody really understands that connection yet. When we unlock this one and it informs a lot of our instruction, that will be terrific. But we don't have a great understanding of it quite yet. What's interesting is my son and my husband, who've had great intervention and now read at grade level, when you run an assessment, they'll look terrific. Phonemic awareness is now right on top of it, but RAN's a bit sluggish, and it's just remained so, which is interesting. And as you know with reading, that orchestra that's got to play when you're reading, everybody's got to come in at the right time. And when your RAN is sluggish, violins aren't coming in when they should, the oboe maybe didn't remember to come in, and that's what's happening with the RAN. We're drawing on these pieces, and they're not playing as an orchestra like they should, right? It's a good way of looking at it for parents. The other thing about RAN, rapid automatized naming, is remember when you're assessing it, this is something they have to already be familiar with. You're drawing on information they've already seen. How quickly can they bring it up? Automatically. So the biggest mistake that we make is when we think that children or adults are too old or beyond phonemic awareness. If they don't have phonemic proficiency, that's instant access to the phonemes in spoken words without even thinking about it, which is pretty well developed in typical readers by 3rd grade, then that is a skill that needs to be addressed, or else we have no reason to expect any substantial improvements in word level reading. This is Dr. David Kilpatrick, my hero, author of, thank you, Laura, my well-loved and used, his Essentials book, 2015, it's written here. If you buy nothing else as an educator, I would purchase this book. And he gives me none of the royalties from this book, although he should. He's done all the last 30 years of reading research. He's gone through it and then pulled it, the best pieces, into this book and said, okay, what has it told us? What are the best interventions? And that's where he boils down a lot of the three things that you're looking for dyslexia is in this book. And he does assessment like nobody I've seen. So that's awesome right there as a resource for educators. But that's just an example of a rapid automatized naming thing that you could use. Remember, we typically only have 5 items at a time. We'd mix them up. They try to read them on one line, would mix them up differently on the next line. How quickly and automatically can they do that? And we're assessing how they draw on information that they know. This components of effective reading instruction you've seen from the National Reading Panel. And again, as you know in the pyramid, phonemic awareness, phonics, the foundation at the bottom, leading to fluency vocabulary. I'd like us to also think about this as an equation. This equals, or this plus this plus this, and at the end we want to equal comprehension always. Oftentimes I've heard people discuss reading like comprehension is on an island, and all the skills you need to get to comprehension are on another island. And those two islands don't know each other. But no, actually this is an equation, and none of it works without the other. We all want to get to comprehension. That's where every kid wants to be. And these are the skill sets to get to comprehension, right? And they build on each other, absolutely build on each other. I'm not going to be fluent, therefore I'm not going to want to read, therefore I'm not going to get exposed to more vocabulary, so I know less. And it's that Matthew effect. The more years I'm not exposed to literature, the further behind I fall because I haven't been accessing that information to gain a broader field of understanding. Therefore, my comprehension is lacking because I haven't had a chance for it. So according to the National Reading Panel, word recognition instruction should be, and these are the pieces you want to look for in your program, explicitly taught by the teacher. I'm not guessing at what you're trying to tell me, but you're explicitly teaching it to me. So I've heard it correctly from you. Systematically planned and organized. You have a system that you're following. It's not random. You know what you're going to do the next day. You know what you're going to do if I didn't get it today. You have a plan for me tomorrow. That's the systematic part, and it's organized. It makes sense. Someone has gone through and made sure that it's organized. I haven't randomly pulled it together. And it's sequenced in a fashion that moves from simple to complex. So I'm going to give you skills that are simple to begin with. You can build more complex. I'm not going to overwhelm you. And typically in a classroom, I even remember back to my own experience, you teach very hard things and then back up and say, oh, but most of the time it does this. We want to lead with most of the time it does this, and sometimes this might happen after you've taught this to knowledge. And then reading instruction that benefits all students, higher level students who could benefit from an overview of skills to apply to reading, spelling, and vocabulary with an understanding of the why, along with numerous opportunities to practice with controlled and expository leveled and lexile text. That's what we're after for everybody. And then students who need to fill in gaps and make connections to increase their accuracy and fluency to ensure reading success. So as Kilpatrick said, we can't continue on if we don't have phonemic awareness, even if you're an adult. If you don't understand the sounds, we are a sounded language. When we read, we are mapping sounds to a code. So never forget that. If I don't know the sounds to that code, I cannot read. I am lost in the sounds literally. So spoken language first, mapped to those letters. And that's an adult as well as a child. Struggling students who need explicit, intensive, multisensory instruction in core reading skills to make connections to the language centers of the brain and change their educational trajectory. So we make different connections for students by teaching them in a structured literacy program. But keep in mind for the older students who especially have not been found till they are older, they will read slower. And that's what the research says. I will probably always be a little slower at my reading. So if I've been taught in a good structured literacy program, now I decode and I sound really good, which is awesome. I have more desire to read, but I'm still slower. I need a 504 to protect me, to give me more time. So let's always remember to protect those kids that we're serving. And then the research validated elements of successful reading intervention programs, like I showed you in my favorite book. Number one, that phonemic awareness, which everybody remembers the sounds. They provided phonic decoding. Now I'm showing you the syllable types and how to take that apart and how the sounds react in those. And then they provided ample opportunities. Number three is huge, because we spend a lot of time on maybe 1 and 2, but getting to the text. I have to have ample opportunity in connected text. And oftentimes you'll find that in intervention, particularly like my son, who was in a tiered intervention, he spent most of his time learning to decode, but hardly ever in text. And then the other piece, remember, I need a couple of opportunities with text. I need text that's going to be like training wheels. You've really controlled it. It's what you just taught me, that skill set. Now I get to ride with training wheels on that text and really feel like a champ because it's all been controlled for me to be successful. But I'm also going to have to be exposed to text that doesn't have training wheels. So get me to that other text as well. Show me how to attack that other text. And oftentimes we don't do that because we spend a lot of time here. So it's we need all the components of it. And then moving on to that, what it looks like. Here you go, Laura.
Okay. So that's the reading science, and that's great to know, but now what, so what? Or so what, now what? So let's talk about what is explicit systematic sequential instruction, because we hear those terms thrown around a lot, and do we really know what that means? So number one, absolutely letters and formations, very important. And B and D is really an important one because students, no matter their age, including adults, often confuse things like B and D. Why? Because they're the exact same letter in a different orientation. But what are the strategies that we continue to use? Things like make your bed or whatever. Those are visual strategies with people who struggle with that and directionality. So there's a whole nother way of teaching students how to wire that to sound. B and D look very much alike in lowercase. They don't sound at all alike when they pronounce the sound. So the goal is to wire it to sound, and there's an easy way to do that, but we have to make sure that's done explicitly. Mastery of consonant and vowel sounds, short vowels first with cueing. So again, because short vowel sounds are very difficult for students to learn and hold on to, using cueing is very important. Cueing as in when you provide a word or sounds, bigrams, etc., that you're connecting that to the vowel so they can hold on to that as an anchor. Then we just need to make sure students need that they have the building blocks and that we provide them explicitly. Things like blends and digraphs, syllable patterns, diphthongs, those kinds of things. And again, that it goes in a sequence from simple to most complex. And that we don't move forward until students have those skills to mastery. And then, this is something I didn't know. I have a master's in special ed. Shouldn't I, I was supposed to be the expert in my building. Every syllable in English can only have one vowel or vowel sound. What happens after the vowel determines pronunciation. How did I not know that? True blends, I didn't even know what a true blend is, had never even heard the term. Stay together in syllabication, where everything else splits. Schwa happens. I have had zero training in even identifying it, and it's one of the most challenging things teachers have when they're trying to explain to a kid why the word America sounds like that when there's an A at the beginning and at the end, and it's neither long or short. And spelling rules and patterns that we've been told never exist 100% in English, and that's not true. There are patterns that exist essentially 100% of the time. So what explicit systematic language is not is crossing the midline, where we're spending a lot of time on tapping or writing in sand or in shaving cream. There is not good research to support that is more tactile and kinesthetic than it is multisensory, what we're wiring those language centers in the brain. And we saw that when a student has dyslexia, their brain, we're literally wiring the brain. We're activating language centers that don't currently exist, and then we're wiring them together. Or having students memorize terms like CVC, CVCC, open and closed syllables. Those terms alone don't mean anything to them, and it actually increases their cognitive load. So what we want to do is show students those patterns, but in a way that they can grasp. So here's an example of a pattern, and I'm a good reader and writer. I'm one of those 60% that my brain is wired for print, and yet I did not know this. Why? We spell cat with C and kitten with K. They have the same sound at the beginning, and in this case, they're even the same animal. And it turns out this is one of those rules that's 100% of the time in English. When the sound of k is followed by I or E, it's going to be spelled with a K. With the sound after k is a A or a U, it's going to be spelled with a C. So we're listening for the vowel sound immediately following k, and that will determine pronunciation. That's essentially 100% of the time in English. But what's cool about that is, what about when a word doesn't follow the pattern, like kayak? It's not an English word, that's an Inuit word. What about the word kangaroo? That's an Aboriginal word. What about the word karma? That's a Sanskrit word. So right away, we can start talking about origin. English patterns don't always follow, English words, the words that we encounter, don't always follow those patterns. Why? Because English is made up of many languages, French, German, Latin, Greek, etc. But this is the pattern for English words. But wait, it gets better. Because what about when C is followed by I or an E? That's when it changes to the sound of S 100% of the time. So it's something that's predictable, something that students can go, ah. And you see that we are also putting an X under the vowel. Why? Because in English, vowels are the key to pronunciation. Then there's the issue of true blends. A true blend, I never had heard that term. And in fact, I'd heard lots of terms like MP, N blends, etc. In English, there are really only 3 true blends: L blends, R blends, and S blends. True blends are defined as 2 or 3 consonants that stand together, each retaining their own sound, and they must be able to start an English word. They can appear anywhere in the word, but they must be able to start an English word. MP doesn't start any English words, and G doesn't start any English words. And why does that matter? Because when we start to get to multisyllabic words and we're going to split into syllables, true blends stay together, and that's why they're arced together, so that students start to do a feature analysis, so they start to see something in a word that tells them what to do. So the other thing about English is that it turns out I knew about syllable types, but I didn't really know how they worked in terms of the structure of English. So these 5 very simple one-syllable types are essentially how English is built. And so we're just going to go through 5 phonetic skills very, very quickly. So the first one is what we call phonetic skill 1. And so what we're going to do is we're going to find that key vowel and mark it with an X underneath the word. So moving from left to right, we're going to find it and we're going to identify it so that we can look behind it to see what's there. Because remember, we talked about there's a pattern in English, and that is when there's one consonant after the vowel is going to be short. That's the way English works. And we call that a guardian consonant because it guards that short sound. Now, how easy is that for kids to learn? Pretty easy, because it's a consistent pattern that they'll see over and over again. Why is this helpful for students with dyslexia and other reading challenges? Because they can visually track what's happening on the word. And that makes a big difference when you're seeing lots of words on a page and you have no way to identify the pattern. Phonetic skill 2 is exactly the same, except that it has 2 consonants after the vowel. So we're going to find our vowel, we're going to go up and around the back of the word because, again, it's what happens after the vowel that determines pronunciation. 2 consonants after the vowel make the vowel short. There is an exception to this, and it's O and I vowel families. O, OLD, OLT, OST, ILD, IND. And will we teach that? Absolutely. Do we teach it at the same time we teach the most common pattern? Absolutely not. That's when we confuse kids. We're throwing things at them, and we want them to learn and hold on to those most common patterns that they're going to see in English. So 2 guardian consonants make the vowel short. Then we get to phonetic skill 3, and because we know the rule is it's what happens after the vowel that determines pronunciation, is there a consonant after this vowel? Nope. Then it's not going to be short, so this vowel is long. What's also amazing is by the time we learn these 3 very, very basic syllable types, over 70% of the most common syllable types in English. And easy for students to learn and hold on to. Phonetic skill 4 is, the silent E rule. And we do a couple different things here. In one case, students are going to see something for the first time. They're going to see 2 vowels in a syllable. But in English, when an E comes at the end of a word, the E is silent. So we're going to cross that out. We're also not going to call it bossy E, sneaky E, magic E. That's confusing to kids. It doesn't help identify what's happening. We say it's silent E, and why is it there then if it's silent? Because if it weren't, this would be a consonant after the vowel, and the vowel would be short. That silent E is there for one job, and that is to make that first vowel long. Very easy pattern. And then we have our last phonetic skill. They're going to see a different pattern, 2 vowels next to each other this time, but again, each syllable can only have 1 vowel or vowel sound. So the second vowel is silent to make the first vowel long. This is another issue where students are often taught in a way that's confusing. When 2 vowels go walking, the first one does the talking, but that's only true for 9 vowel teams. So what about OI? What about AU? That pattern does not follow those vowel teams. So when we teach this skill, we need to make sure that we identify which vowel teams it does apply to. And so the rule is when 2 specific vowels are adjacent, not always. And that's 5 phonetic skills. Really, really simple for kids to learn. Even kindergartners, when we're looking for that vowel, if the teacher forgets to put an X under the vowel, they'll say, "You forgot to put the X under the vowel." They're really, really able to grasp and hold on to that easily. So I knew the syllable types, but this is what nobody ever told me. How does that relate to multisyllabic words, which is where older students live? Those little words go away pretty quickly. By the time you get into 4th grade, you're in, multisyllabic words. Well, it turns out there's a pattern in English for that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do what we've always been doing. So we're going to find our vowels. And in this case, we have 2 vowels, but E is not at the end. Therefore, it's not silent. We know that every syllable can only have 1 vowel or vowel sound. So that tells us we've got 2 active working sounded vowels. And that tells us we've got 2 syllables. So we just need to look for the number of X's. 2 X's, 2 syllables. But that's not the problem. The problem is, where do we split? In English, we look to see what follows that first vowel. And if it's 1 consonant, it's going to move to the second syllable, and we're going to split here. And then we're going to apply our 5 phonetic skills again. First syllable doesn't have anything after that O in the syllable, so it's going to be long. Second syllable has a guardian consonant after the vowel E, and so therefore it's going to be short, and the word is motel. So when there's 1 consonant after the first vowel or between those vowels, the vowel's going to be short. Again, really easy to apply because they've already seen those basic syllable types that are the basis of language. But this is where those true blends come in. So what about a word like this? So marking underneath helps us identify what we've got to work with. So we've got an R blend, a vowel, an R blend, and another vowel. So how many X's do we have? That tells us how many syllables we're going to have. 2, right? So where are we going to split? Well, true blends, remember, they stay together in syllabication, so they're going to count as one unit. So remember, decoding skill 1 is it's going to move to the second syllable, so we're going to split here. They're going to stay together. That's why that arc is really important for them to see visually. And then we're going to, again, apply our 5 phonetic skills. Nothing after the vowel O, it's going to be long. Guardian consonant is going to be short. The word is program. Now we get to decoding skill 2, and we see a different pattern. We look to see what follows that first vowel or what's in between the 2 vowels. And this time we do have 2 consonants, but they're not arced together, which means they're going to split. And then what we do is we just go back and look at the pattern that applies to that first syllable. 1 consonant guardian after the vowel, it's going to be short. The S is a consonant guardian after the vowel, so the vowel is going to be short, and the word is campus. So when 2 consonants follow a vowel, we're going to split between them. This is where the rubber meets the road, though, because this word has a couple of different things going on in it, and if students don't get that kind of explicit instruction and don't know how to apply the patterns, they don't know what to do. We have 3 of the same vowel. We have 3 E's in this word, but they all have a separate job. And this time, following that first vowel, we have 3 consonants. So what do we do with that word? Well, we do exactly what we've been doing. So we mark our vowels, our R blends, our vowel, and our E at the end of the word. What do we know about E's at the end of the word in English? They're going to be silent. So how many working active vowels do we have, X's do we have? 2. So how many syllables do we have? 2. And because we've got a blend here, that's going to move to the second syllable. And so this is where we're going to split. And then we apply our phonetic skills again. Guardian consonant after the X, vowel is going to be short. Silent E will make the vowel long. The word is extreme. Students can pick that up, especially older students who struggle the most, and teachers are most concerned about helping them make rapid progress. When they see stuff like this, they're like, why didn't anybody ever tell me this? This is easy, because for the first time, somebody's explained what to do. And you can do that with words of any length. So this is the way I like to think of it in terms of wiring the brain. Somebody in training said, oh, it's like the arrow in FedEx. And I was like, what arrow in FedEx? And they said, that arrow in FedEx. And I had never seen an arrow in FedEx before. And now, 3 times a week, I see a FedEx truck. I cannot not see that arrow because it's wired, that pattern is wired in the brain. And I literally, unconsciously now look for it. The brain begins to see patterns in print that it just wasn't aware of before. And then you can't not see it anymore, which is great. The other thing is that we know from the research that Donnell talked about that 40% of kids who are not wired for print, that many of them, it is because of dyslexia. And what's really sad is that we as educators are not really trained on what to look for. I did a training with an elementary school, and one of the first grade teachers said, yeah, I think I have maybe 1 kid in my class with dyslexia. And I know from the research that's not possible, but she didn't know what she was looking for. So when she saw the characteristics of dyslexia, she went, oh my gosh. And it's not just because they reverse B's and D's in first grade. That's developmental. So we need to know what are those indicators. And so in the last year or so, we've developed a free online dyslexia screener. And I just want to give an example for this particular kid. So this is a student who's in 5th grade. He was 12 years old at the time of the screening. And his mother had no idea, and neither did the teachers, of really what his deal was. The problem was he was super bright. That kid has at least a 140 IQ, super bright. And he was being retained. So they kept him in 5th grade, again, because of his reading skills. And when we went through and did the screening, we went back and asked his mother about the characteristics that would be, where that information would come from a parent, like early language history, etc. 16 out of 20 items that are characteristics of dyslexia. And yet nobody had identified that, and he was being held back again. And I just think of all the potential of all the kids who have very, average or above average IQs, and yet we're the ones that aren't receiving the education about what we need to look for. Okay,